Welcome to Transnational Competition Law course, and dear learner, we are going to continue our lecture on embarrassment of extraterritorial application of competition law in developing countries. You can vividly recall my previous lecture on the subject of embarrassment of extraterritorial application of competition law in developing countries in reference to the seminal work of the United Nations organization known as the study happens to be very important in our understanding is the United Nations publication on developing countries experience with extraterritoriality in competition law in 2021. Dear learner, we have understood as how this study wherein 40 countries of the world have submitted to its survey, and on the basis of the survey conducted among the 40 countries of the world, and among all the 40 countries we have developing and underdeveloped countries, what we noted very precisely is the fact that out of 40, 34 countries and jurisdiction have embraced the issue and have been very closer to the very notion and concept of extraterritorial application of the competition law in their domestic jurisdiction. Only 6 countries happens to be saying no, that we are not still in a position to incorporate extraterritorial application of competition law in our jurisdiction. The study which have been referred to you, and it is of great importance in our deepening our understanding, and the study have very brilliantly portrayed the entire concept of the application and embarrassment of the extraterritorial application of competition law. What it suggests and says that it is applied to foreign entities present in the forum provided the conduct harms local consumer or the producer. That remains the basic thrust of the survey, that the domestic legislation in Chile provides an appropriate textual basis for the extraterritorial application of competition law. Not only the statutory backing happens to be there, but it has been judicially innovated and incorporated and interpreted and have given a very respected place in the competition law of the Chile, besides statutory enactment and recognition. Then we refer to that since embarrassment of the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the competition law in developing countries is a kind of a process which is gradual, not immediate, and we cannot expect an overnight changes among all the countries. But as we understand that the law is a tool of social control, law is an instrument of social change, and the social change is generally brought by a gradual process. Law is found, not made, as has been asserted by the historical school of thought, primarily the Savigny and Sir Henry Maine. So if we really understand that law is not made but found, it means where it is found in the deeper conscience of the people, and unless the people and the state in their given wisdom and conscience rightly understand the relative importance of extraterritorial application of competition law, it is not possible that we can bring overnight changes. So the study very rightly and poignantly remarked that the embarrassment of extraterritorial application of competition law in developing countries is a kind of a gradual process, and it's a kind of an organic growth. It's not a kind of an immediate growth, that we can discern and which can be exhibited by the conduct of the developing countries. But what we see that the entire legislative development in 1990s, in 2000 and 2010 and 2020 decades, that the 4 decades, if we can sum up, then what we find that the study have brought what it exactly means, that is the gradual process. What I just mentioned about before you, that law is an instrument of social change, law is an instrument of social control, and law happens to be having an organic growth. Law has a kind of a social Darwinism, that it's a kind of a biological process which goes step by step, and believing in the social Darwinism of the law. And law is not made but found, and found in the states and the people. We have dissected the entire passage of the gradual process of embarrassment of extraterritorial application of competition law under the 3 decades. And the decades after 2020 seems to be a very interesting topic to be further researched and to be probed in a very dispassionate manner, that as of now in 2024, that what are the major trends and tendencies which are to be exhibited and discerned by the country's response to extraterritorial application of the competition law. Dear learner and viewer, here we will be discussing that in 1990s, the first decade, that only out of the 40 countries, as we have mentioned before you, the kind of a source and the survey, we find that in 1990s, that 7 countries have adopted the extraterritorial application of competition law. And here it is worth noting that we have to understand that in the decade of 1990s, whatever development have taken place, then the adopting countries and the total number of the adopting countries in 1990 happens to be 7 out of 40, meaning thereby almost 20% countries have come to the front in incorporating and recognizing an express verbis recognition of extraterritorial application of competition law. And the name of the adopting countries is very important to understand, that the diversification and the length and the breadth at the global level. The first country happens to be the Albania, who incorporated this law in 1995, Argentina in 1999, Brazil in 1994, Costa Rica in 1994, South Africa in 1998, Turkey in 1994, and Zimbabwe in 1996. What we see that in the decades of 1990s, wherein the 7 countries have embraced the extraterritorial application of competition law, primarily most of the countries out of the 7 countries, except South Africa and Zimbabwe, they have done their recognition of extraterritorial application of competition law in the first 5 years, meaning thereby from 1990 to 1995, Albania, Brazil, Costa Rica, Turkey, they have incorporated. In the next 5 years, it happens to be the Argentina, Albania, then Zimbabwe and South Africa. So, with this, the 1990s decade shows that it sets the motion, it sets the tone and tenor of embarrassment of the extraterritorial application of competition law with a gradual manner and a very in a moderate pace. And then we comes to, dear learner, the development in the decades of 2000 and 2010. In this reference, we can say that almost in 2000 to 2010, 16 countries out of the 40 countries of the survey which has been conducted by United Nations Organization in Geneva and published in 2021 mentions very clearly that almost we can say that uh, 40% countries happens to be in consonance with the extraterritorial application provision in their competition statute, and these countries are equally important because as we have seen the seven countries, what we find, there are countries of Africa, there are countries of West Asia, there are countries of South America or the Latin America, or there are countries in Europe, and across all the jurisdiction it happens to be. We can't say that it is only the Asian and African country or the third world countries are lagging behind. But in respect to in 2000, what we find, the name of the countries happens to be the Botswana, China, Botswana recognized in 2009, China in 2008, Colombia in 2009, Egypt 2005, Honduras 2006, India 2002, Namibia in 2008, Nicaragua 2006, Papua New Guinea 2003, Peru 2008, Russian Federation in 2009, Saudi Arabia in 2005, Serbia in 2009, Ukraine in 2002, and United Republic of Tanzania in 2004. Again, dear learner and viewer, what we see that the list of the 16 countries encompasses all nook and corner of the world, and it is very difficult to say that it is only the first world or the second world or the third world, or it is very difficult to say that the developed or developing or underdeveloped, but the name of these countries draw across the globe. And in 2000, but there has been a sizable progress in matters of embarrassment of the extraterritorial application of competition law in their competition statutes, rules, and regulations. Dear learner, now we will look at that what has been the progress in the decade of 2010. We find that 11 countries have adopted and incorporated the extraterritorial application of competition law. So what we find that in the name of the countries is Belarus in 2014, Chile 2013, Dominican Republic 2017, Kenya 2011, Malaysia 2016, Mexico 2013, Nigeria in 2019, and Pakistan in 2010. If we see the nature and trend of embarrassment of the extraterritorial application of the competition law, as the document has rightly remarked, that it's a kind of a gradual process, and the gradual process which has been triggered in 1990s, 2000, and 2010 across 3 decades. What we find that the most of the development took place in the decade of 2000 to 2010, and taken together we find that there are 34 countries which have responded out of 40 countries in making a kind of an earnest effort in embarrassment of the competition law. Thus, dear learner, what we see and what we decipher is the fact that the embarrassment of extraterritoriality in competition law has been a gradual process, and it remains beyond any reasonable doubt. And now we can safely say the earliest adopter of the extraterritorial application of competition law happens to be Brazil, Costa Rica, and Turkey, who embraced extraterritoriality in competition law as far back as in 1994. However, it should also be noted and to be realized that some countries provided for extraterritoriality earlier, but have since fallen into different countries' classification, and therefore what we find that there is another list of the countries. For example, Poland embraced extraterritoriality law on countering monopolistic practices in the national economy in the decades of 1980s in 1987. Out of this discussion, what we find that the process of embarrassment of the extraterritoriality is something very interesting and discerns a kind of a gradual and incremental trend right from 1980s, 1990s, 2000, 2010, and 2020, and as of now needs further a kind of a study to bring some kind of the remark on that happens to be something reserved unless we go through some of the development of last 3 4 years, that how the countries of the world have reacted and responded to the extraterritorial application of competition law. Then, dear learner and viewer, we will be straightway discussing that, and we will try to see that as to what is the corpus of the international competition law, be that the soft international law, be that the hardcore international law. We will try to see and see in the right earnest that how the international agreement on the competition law goes well with the embarrassment of extraterritorial application of the competition law. Here, dear learner, when we talk of international agreement on competition law, the major source of the international agreement on competition law is to draw a framework of extraterritorial application of competition law in developing countries. It is nothing but imperative to understand the international agreement on competition law and do to this end what we will refer to the several bodies. One happens to be very important, and that is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and the second happens to be the one is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. The another happens to be the Organization on Economic Cooperation and Development, and the third happens to be the International Competition Network. Having a kind of a holistic understanding of the laws and policies besides the national competition laws and policies which permeated among 34 countries out of the 40 surveying countries, we will try to see that how these three major institutions and major edifice have built some kind of the competition law that are to be followed, and that has to be embraced gradually at the national jurisdiction. What we find that there are various agreements to increase competition and gather cooperation on an international level to regulate it. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development has set of multilaterally agreed equitable principles and rules for the control of restrictive business practice. So this is very important document that talks about a kind of an one is the agreed, another is equitable, and both are very important. That these principles are not that should be applied in a sledgehammer manner, but these are the principles which are to be applied with the consent of the member state, and not only the consent, it should be based on principles of equity and equitable principles, and those rules which governs the control of restrictive business practices must seek the approval from the United Nations Conference on Restrictive Business Practices 1980. The resolution of 22nd April 1980 is very important in that reference, which has been endorsed, the entire principle which has been carved out by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development on the issue of set of multilaterally agreed equitable principles and rules for the control of restrictive business practices have been well endorsed by the United Nations Conference on Restrictive Business Practices in 1980, and United Nations General Assembly has also put its seal of approval in 1980 under its resolution number 35/63 of the 5th December 1980. Taken together, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development set of multilaterally agreed equitable principles and rules for the control of restrictive business practices have seen a clear passage by the United Nations Conference on Restrictive Business Practices in 1980 and United Nations General Assembly, and this is called UN Set of Principles and Rules on Competition that forms a very cardinal document, and it has some kind of a cardinality and centrality in governing the entire corpus of the competition law. Even some of the countries of the globe are faltering or not coming into the terms of the competition law. The UN set of principles and rules on competition can be a grand norm as an anchor sheet that will guide the entire purpose and effect test to be applied in matters of competition law. And this principle, which has been very meticulously carved out, UN sets of principles and rules on competition that sets and recommends case by case understanding and application concerning the purpose and the effect test, and then the intergovernmental group of the expert determines the application and implementations of United Nations sets of principles and rules on competition. Further, we see a very important milestone in regard to the competition law, and that is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development Model Law on Competition, which has supplanted the United Nations sets of principles and rules on competition, and this United Nations Conference on Trade and Development Model Law on Competition serves as the basis and enables the developing countries by guiding on drafting and improving their antitrust laws, the competition laws, competition regulation, competition policy, competition statutes. With this, dear learner, we ends and what we try to conclude that even if the countries of the world, as has been evidenced by the study of United Nations in 2021, that 34 countries responded, and it has been a gradual process, and still we have some countries which are uh, trailing behind, and then in that scenario, the competition laws and policy across the globe should not be a casualty, and that fillip has been given by the International Agreement on Competition. And precisely in today's lecture, we focus on the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and their contribution of agreed equitable principles and rules and control of restrictive business practices. And then we refer to the United Nations Conference on Restrictive Business Practices 1980 and United Nations General Assembly's endorsement of the Restrictive Business Practices Resolution of 1980. And finally, we have pulled out a very handy document that is called United Nations Set of Principles and Rules on Competition, and which finally supplanted into the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development Model Law on the Competition to enable the developing countries for drafting and refurbishing and reforming the competition law in their right earnest. With this, dear learner and viewer, I conclude my lecture, and then we will be switching over to the issue of embarrassment of the extraterritorial application of competition law in reference to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development and International Competition Network and other issues, which is on the flip side of the entire problematic that we'll be discussing in lectures to come. Thank you very much. Have a happy learning.